Welcome back to the Oddity Shop podcast, the podcast where we talk about creepy, odd, weird, bizarre, paranormal, weird things from all around our little globe. I'm your curator, Kara, and I'm your only curator, Kara, because Zachary moved to Arizona and then decided that he doesn't want to continue on with the podcast. It was just too much for him. So I'm going to continue being your curator, your host, and hopefully you like solo episodes. Just kidding. This is one time, and hopefully one time only, that you only have to deal with just me. So again, I'm your curator, Kara, and I'm so excited to do a solo episode for you guys. I hope you guys like it. Okay. So we have to open the shop up with a question. Have you ever had that feeling that someone was watching you? I'll pause so you guys can answer. Do, 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 do. Okay. And it's not a ghost, not a monster, just another person. You're walking home after dark. You hear a car, someone behind you. At first, you don't think much of it. Cars are everywhere. But then you notice something. It's moving incredibly slow. Not because of traffic, not because it's looking for a parking spot, because it's matching your pace. And you tell yourself not to be ridiculous. You glance over your shoulder. It's a black sedan. Long, boxy, the headlights cut through the darkness, but the windshield is almost impossible to see through. The windows are covered, and whoever's inside isn't making any move to get your attention. The car just follows. You cross the street, and a few seconds later, so does the car. Your heart starts racing. You convince yourself that if you just make it home, everything will be okay. Then, as quietly as it appeared, the car turns the corner and disappears into the night. No big deal. We've all had something weird like that. You feel like somebody's following you in the what is it called? This is why we need Zach. In the walkways of a store, the grocery store, you feel like somebody's following you and you just get a little bit paranoid, right? Okay. So then tomorrow you tell someone what happened. You call up your best friend, Zach, and say, hey. But instead of asking if you're okay, Zach says, was it a Black Volga? For decades, that single question was enough to send chills through people across Poland, Russia, Ukraine. I think it's Belarus. We don't have Zachary here for us. Hungary, Romania, and much of what was once the Soviet bloc. Okay, so this became something that parents warned their children about, teachers whispered about, neighbors claimed they'd seen it. Some said it belonged to the secret police. Others believed priests were inside. Some insisted Satan himself was behind the wheel, which I just have to say, if I was Satan myself, I would not be behind the wheel. Somebody would be escorting my salty little ass. You know what I'm saying? Come on now. Okay. There were stories of children disappearing without a trace, of black dogs running beside the car. We all know how I feel about that. Of license plates marked with the number 666 and windows covered by white curtains that hid whoever or whatever was sitting inside. No one could agree on exactly who drove the Black Volga. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. If it stopped for you, you never wanted to find out why. Tonight, whenever my little oddballs you're listening, we're diving into one of the strangest and most enduring urban legends to come out of the Cold War. A legend that blurred the line between political, paranoia, folklore, and supernatural horror. Because unlike stories about haunted houses or cursed dolls, this wasn't about avoiding one creepy location. People believed this thing could find you anywhere. And maybe the strangest part of all, the Black Volga was real. And it wasn't a legend, like the car. Thousands of them rolled off Soviet assembly lines beginning in the 1950s. To most people, it was simply a luxury automobile. But somewhere along the way, the ordinary car transformed into one of the most feared symbols in Eastern Europe. So how does an everyday vehicle become a monster? How do thousands of people across multiple countries become convinced that the same black sedan is stalking their streets? And could there be a grain of truth buried beneath decades of rumors? I don't know. Let's try to find it out. Also, it is the 3rd of July and there are fireworks going on. And also the editing is not going to be as pristine as our wonderful Zachary does for us. So I really do apologize on that. I just didn't want you to have multiple weeks of not having an episode. Anyway, so before we get into the legend itself, I think we have to understand the world it was born into. So because the story doesn't just begin with like ghosts, it doesn't begin with the kidnappings, and it definitely doesn't begin with the devil. It begins with fear, real fear. So imagine waking up every morning knowing that the government might be listening to your phone calls. I mean, they kind of might be now. Knowing that criticizing the wrong person could cost you your job. Knowing that your neighbor or even a family member could report something that you said. For many people living beyond the Iron Curtain during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, that wasn't paranoia. That was just life. And after the Second World War, much of Eastern Europe fell under communist governments backed by the Soviet Union. So countries like Poland, East Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, and others were suddenly living under systems where information was tightly controlled. Okay, so television wasn't independent. Newspapers weren't free to report whatever they wanted. Radio stations were monitored. The government decided what people heard and, just as importantly, what they didn't hear. I mean, it doesn't sound too far off from now, but you get where we're going. So when information disappears, rumor, though, takes place. So think about it. Today, if someone posts online and there's a mysterious car kidnapping people, within hours, there would be security footage, police statements, eyewitnesses, videos, and probably dozens of people trying to debunk it. Back then, none of that existed. So if your cousin said a child disappeared after getting into a Black Volga, how would you prove that it didn't happen? You didn't. Rumors spread through conversations at work, over dinner tables, outside of churches, schoolyards, and while waiting in long lines at the grocery store. And each time the story was repeated, another detail was added. Right? So another certainty, another warning. And it didn't take long before almost everyone had heard about the Black Volga. The strange thing is that nobody, though, can pinpoint exactly where the legend started. There are times where we can pinpoint why an urban legend started, whether it was a horrific murder or an accident, things like that, that spirals into like a story that we tell everybody, right? This is something that like nobody really could figure out where it came from. There really wasn't a newspaper article. There wasn't like a famous kidnapping, kind of like I was just saying. And there wasn't one police investigation that launched it into public consciousness. Instead, it seemed to have appeared almost everywhere at once, like fog rolling across the city. One neighbor heard it first, then another, and then another. And eventually the story became so common that children expected it the same way that kids accept the fire is hot or ice is cold. It wasn't a rumor. It was simply something everyone knew. And the car at the center of it all wasn't chosen at random. So the Volga wasn't just an automobile. It was a symbol of power. It was manufactured by the Soviet company. I believe it's GAS, and I believe it's gas is how it's pronounced. Guz. Anyway, the Volga was considered one of the most prestigious cars available in the Eastern Bloc. Most ordinary families couldn't afford it. Many couldn't even dream of owning it. Instead, these cars were driven by doctors, military officers, high-ranking Communist Party officials, senior engineers, Carrie's coming out, factory directors, and sometimes members of the state security services. So seeing a Black Volga pull up outside your apartment wasn't like seeing your neighbor's sedan. It meant someone important had arrived, or worse, that somebody who had authority to change your life. So that's what makes this legend so fascinating. It didn't begin with something supernatural. It began with something ordinary that people already feared. And as we're about to find out, the fear had a way of growing into something much, much darker. No one can agree on who saw it first. And honestly, that's probably exactly how the legends like this begin. Not with that one big event and not with, it's just dozens of little stories. A mother hears it from a parent at school. A factory worker mentions it, seeing a strange black car outside the neighborhood. Nobody can point to names and no one can produce evidence, but everyone knows someone who knows somebody that saw it. right? And so by the mid 1960s, stories about the Black Volga were spreading through Poland like wildfire. One version claimed the car drove slowly through residential neighborhoods just before sunset. It never sped. It never screeched its tires. It simply cruised. People said that was the strangest part. It never seemed to be in a hurry, almost like it knew it had all the time in the world. And children started paying attention whenever they heard an engine. If they saw a long black sedan coming down the street, they'd stop whatever game they were playing and disappear into the nearest house. Because obviously parents encouraged it. Better be safe than sorry. Whether they actually believed the story or not, it almost didn't really matter at that point. The rumor had become so useful. Don't stay out after dark. Don't wander too far. Don't talk to strangers. And if you see a Black Volga, run. One woman interviewed decades later by Polish folklorist remembered that the fear was so widespread, her mother would physically pull her off the sidewalk whenever a Black Volga drove by. She laughed while telling the story, but she also admitted at the time it felt completely real. Another man remembered walking home across school and seeing a Black Volga parked across from the entrance of his apartment building. It was probably waiting for somebody, maybe a government official, maybe a doctor making a house call. But to the group of 10-year-olds, there was only one explanation. They turned around and walked 3 extra blocks just to avoid passing it. And no one ever got into the car. Nothing happened. But decades later, he still remembers exactly where it was parked. That's what fear does. It burns ordinary moments into memory, and the stories themselves were surprisingly consistent at first. The car was always black, almost always spotless. Its windows were too dark to see through, or they were covered by small white curtains, and that detail shows up over and over again, the white curtains. Imagine seeing that, like a perfectly clean black sedan rolling silently down your street with lace curtains hanging in the windows. Like, you know someone's inside, you just can't see them. And somehow that's like even worse. It's kind of like the equivalent though today of everyone having tinted windows. Like, you can't see who's in there, and it's kind of like, is there somebody in there? Are they watching me as I'm like parked in the parking lot, like eating my Taco Bell? I don't know. It's creepy. Some people claimed the car would slow down besides children walking alone. Others said it stopped near bus stops where teenagers waited after school. And a few versions claim the driver would simply ask for directions. Nothing threatening, nothing really dramatic, just an ordinary question. The idea was that if you stepped close enough to answer, the door would fly open, you'd be pulled inside, and the car would disappear before anyone even realized what had happened. Again, there were never confirmed police reports matching any of these stories. No wave of documented kidnappings tied around Black Volgas, but that didn't stop the legend from growing. In fact, the lack of evidence almost made it stronger, because when no one could prove the rumors wrong, people filled in the blanks themselves. So the Black Volga became the explanation for every unexplained disappearance, every missing child, every person who simply vanished, even somebody like moved away unexpectedly. Maybe the Black Volga got them. If someone never came home, maybe the Black Volga was seen nearby. It's easy to roll our eyes now, but think about how quickly rumors spread today. One grainy video gets posted online. Within hours, thousands of people are convinced they've seen something. Now, imagine a world without fact checking, without surveillance cameras, without 24-hour news. Rumors didn't have to compete with evidence, and sometimes they became the evidence. Then, as years went on, something interesting happened. The stories stopped becoming about the car. They started becoming about whoever or whatever was inside. And that's when the legend took a turn from unsettling to absolutely terrifying. So at first, people thought they knew who was inside, government officials. That made sense. The Volga wasn't a common family car. It was expensive, prestigious, and usually reserved for people with influence. Doctors drove them, military officers like we talked about before, party officials. So if you saw a Black Volga parked outside your apartment building, it usually meant someone important was there, or someone who could make your life very difficult, kind of like what we talked about earlier. Okay, that's why the earliest versions of the legend weren't supernatural. they were political. Some people whispered about the government that was using the cars to kidnap children for secret experiments. Others believed political prisoners were being transported in them under the cover of darkness. Okay. And there were stories about people who criticized the government and were quietly picked up and never seen again. Now, to be clear, historians have never found evidence that there was some secret fleet of Black Volgos kidnapping civilians, okay? But that doesn't mean people weren't irrational for being afraid, and it also doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But communist governments throughout the Eastern Bloc absolutely maintained secret police organizations. Cities were watched, homes were searched, political opponents were arrested, and families sometimes woke up to discover that their neighbor, coworker, or relative had simply disappeared. Those disappearances were not folklore. They were real. The Black Volga simply became the symbol people attached to those fears. And then the story changes. People became, maybe because they were passed from one town to other, maybe because children kept adding to details. We know how this goes. It's kind of like telephone. It's never going to be the same message at the other end. Or maybe because every generation reshapes its monsters. Whatever the reason, the driver stopped being a government official, and now it was a priest. So, to some outside Eastern Europe, that probably sounds like a strange leap. But legends rarely make sense unless you understand the world they come from. So, in countries like Poland, religion remained deeply important despite communist rule. Churches often became places where people could quietly resist government control. At the same time, the government kept a close eye on religious leaders, and rumors circulated about priests, informants, and secret meetings. Somehow, those tensions twisted into folklore. Children began hearing stories that priests drove Black Volgas and were abducting kids. No one could explain why. Some versions said that they needed blood. Others claimed that they were looking for children with rare blood types. Others never gave a reason at all. The priest was simply the villain. It's a pattern you'll notice throughout history. When society fears a group, whether the fear is justified or completely unfounded, that group often finds its way into urban legends. The same thing happening with traveling salesmen, clowns, doctors, even babysitters. Legends don't usually invent brand new villains. They borrow people who already make us uneasy. Then, sometime in the late 1960s, the early 70s, the story became even darker, much darker. So the priest disappeared, just like the car and the driver who drove it. The people whispered that the Black Volga belonged to Satanists. According to these versions, the people inside weren't simply kidnapping children, they were collecting them for rituals. Some stories claimed they needed fresh blood. Others insisted they were making sacrifices. There was never agreement about what actually happened once someone was taken, only that they never came back. And I guess, if they don't come back, how are we supposed to know what happened? And as strange as it sounds today, it's worth remembering that the world was in the middle of what many historians call a global satanic scare, long before the satanic panic of the 1980s reached North America. Rumors about occult groups and secret ceremonies had already been circulating through Europe. So fear doesn't need facts, right? It only needs that mystery part of it. So then came the version that most people remember, which is the devil himself. Some children swore that if you managed to look through the windshield, the driver was not human. Okay. Sometimes he had glowing red eyes. Sometimes he wore black gloves and smiled without moving his lips, which is absolutely disturbing. Sometimes his face looked perfectly normal until the car passed under a streetlight. And then, just for a second, people claimed they saw horns. And I don't know why, but I think that part's cool. You look really normal, and then just under that streetlight, the horns appear. And others insisted there was no driver at all. The steering wheel turned by itself, kind of like Christine, just like. Hey, Zach, are you running low on spiritual supplies?
Hey, Kara, are you looking for a place with handmade items?
Yeah, we should probably go to Mystic Moons.
Oh, our buddies?
Yeah.
They make the most wonderful hand-dipped incense with over 24 scents, and we've smelled absolutely every single one of them.
Yeah, or maybe you might just be looking for a hand-strung bracelet made with only the best intentions.
And not only do they have the best intentions, they have 4 strings each and they last forever, which I would know because I've broken every bracelet you've made for me and not theirs.
Oops. Well, they also have simmer pots for every occasion, like San to Yule.
And don't forget, Melinda is also a medium and a tarot card reader who's given us amazing readings, so she's ready to help us or you connect with past loved ones and get to know insights into your world.
My spirit animal is a camel. Thanks, Melinda. Anyway, so look for Mystic Moons on Facebook or Etsy, and then you can restock all your spiritual supplies.
Oh, be sure to check them out at www.etsy.com/shop/Mystic Moons LLC.
Or at Mystic Moons on Facebook. They're all over our socials, so I'm sure you'll find them.
So go get some goodies. Okay, Kara, goodbye.
Bye. A possessed car, I guess. The car glided slightly through the streets as though something unseen was controlling it. One of my favorite details, and one that appears in several versions of legend, is the license plate. So some people claim that the Black Volga carried the number 666. Another says the numbers change every time you looked away. So it's like, it might be like normal numbers or whatnot. And then you look at it, you're like, does that say 666? And then you glance away and it's like not, you know what I mean? A few even claimed there were no numbers at all, just a blank black plate. So it's amazing how legends grow. Like we've talked about this so many times. The first stories were almost believable: an expensive government car, suspicious men, possible kidnappings. But by the end of the decade, the same car had become a rolling nightmare. Not that it wasn't before, but driven by the devil, guarded by black dogs, powered by something that wasn't entirely human. And somehow people believed every version. And not because they were gullible, because fear has a way of making contradictions seem perfectly reasonable. Like we all can understand that. And when you're scared enough, you stop asking whether the details make sense. You only ask one question. What if it's true? It's kind of what our podcast is built on, right? What if it's true? That's the question that kept the Black Volga alive, not for a few months and not for a few years, but for decades. And while all of these stories sound like folklore, there was one part of the legend that was very real. People really did start running when they saw a Black Volga. And once this started happening, the legend no longer needed monsters. People had become part of the story themselves. The strangest thing about the Black Volga isn't the stories, it's the memories. If you talk to people who grew up in Poland, Ukraine, or all the other parts, formerly in the Eastern Bloc during the 1960s and 70s, you'll hear something interesting. Many of them don't tell the legend as if it's folklore. They tell if it's a childhood memory. I remember my mom grabbing my arm whenever it drove by. We weren't allowed to walk alone. My grandmother always told us to stay away from Black Volgas. These kinds of stories come up again and again, and not because they prove the legend was true, but because they prove something just as interesting. The fear was. Imagine being 8 years old. You and your friends are playing soccer in the street. The ball rolls into the road. Somebody is about to go chase it, and another kid yells, "Black Volga." And everyone looks. A long black sedan is coming down the street. Maybe it's moving slowly because there are children nearby chasing after a ball. Maybe the driver is looking for an address, or maybe just simply driving home after work. But none of that matters because within seconds, every kid has disappeared. The ball is left sitting in the middle of the road. Curtains move inside nearby houses as parents peek through the windows. The car continues down the street. It doesn't stop. It doesn't turn. Never doing anything suspicious at all, actually. And 5 minutes later, the children continuously come back outside. They start playing again. But they'll remember the moment for years, not because anything happened, because something almost happened. At least that's how it felt. Fear has an incredible ability to turn ordinary moments into unforgettable memories. Come on, Carrie. Psychologists have studied this for decades. And when we're frightened, our brains become hyper aware. We notice details we'd normally forget. The sound of tires on the pavement, the reflection in a windshield, the way headlights bounce off wet asphalt. And years later, we remember those details so vividly. Sometimes more vividly than events that actually changed our lives. That one reason urban legends survive for so long is because of that. People aren't remembering the legend, they're remembering how the legend made them feel. our feelings are very stubborn, right? Like we think we're stubborn, but it's like our feelings. And one folklorist who interviewed adults about the Black Volga found something fascinating. Almost everyone remembered hearing the stories. Very few could remember where they'd first heard them. And think about that. The legend had become so deeply woven into everyday life that it felt as though it had always existed. Nobody could point to the beginning. It was simply there. Legends aren't really about proving whether something happened. They're about understanding why people needed the story in the first place, right? So the Black Volga wasn't just a scary car. It was a fear with four wheels. It was everything people couldn't control rolled into one image, right? So the government, strangers, disappearing children, secrets, power, death. It became the perfect monster because it never stayed the same. Every generation added something new. Every town changed a detail. Every family remembered it a little differently, but the feeling stayed exactly the same. The movement when the black car slows down beside you, the tiny voice in the back of your head telling you not to stop walking, don't look, don't get too close. Even today, most of us have experienced some version of that feeling. Maybe we're walking through a parking lot after work, or maybe you're walking your dog late at night. A vehicle slows down, your instincts immediately start asking who's inside, why are they driving slowly? Are they looking for something? Are they looking at me? We all know that, right? And we're trying to figure out what it is. And our instincts, they don't wait for the explanation, right? Like sometimes we just react first. Maybe that's why the Black Volga has survived for more than half a century, because underneath all the supernatural details, it taps into something that's still very human. It's our instincts, right? And it's something that's wrong. It's our anxiety that convinces us that danger is hiding wherever, right? It's to tell ourselves to keep walking, to trust ourselves. Whether you believe in the ghosts, the demons, the curses, or none of the above, it's probably not bad advice to just be aware, right? One of the things I love most about urban legends is that they're like time capsules. You can almost pinpoint what society was afraid of simply by looking at the story who told it. We've told this so many times about different, urban legends and folklore and things like that. So during the Cold War, people feared secret governments, right? Surveillance, disappearances, powerful people. So this makes sense. It's exactly who or what ended up driving the Black Volga. Today, our fears look completely different. We worry about technology. God, artificial intelligence, scams, deep fakes, being watched online instead of through apartment windows. If the Black Volga were born today, I wonder what it would become. Maybe it wouldn't even really be a car. Maybe it would be like a rideshare driver with no profile picture, or the self-driving vehicles. Zach just had his first, appearance, his first time in one of those. I've never been in one, but I don't know. But obviously, like we were just saying, every generation creates its own monster. So the names change, but the stories kind of evolve. It's just crazy because fear is so timeless. And that's probably the real reason that the Black Volga never really disappeared, is because it was real. I feel like I'm rambling, but you get the idea. We paint our fears. Maybe we paint them black, give it an engine, and watch them slowly drive through the darkness. I don't know, but I just found this was one of those where it was like a classic, oldish version of how fears turn into urban legends. And I could talk about this all night, because it's one of those things where, was it really an urban legend? It obviously started from something. Was it just one instance that somebody had with a Black Volga that made it unsettling and a bad experience, or like a horrifying traumatic experience, and then it snowballed and spiraled into, the telephone game of like a warning? Rightfully so. It was granted, but it turned into all types of different things. It's just one of those things where I'm not sure what I think this was. Do we think that it was government? And we think that it was like secret societies and terrible things that were happening, right? Like we know about that all the time right now. Like there's still human trafficking and children trafficking and things like that. So it's not like that's gone away or it wasn't true. Not to say that this was that. Do we think it was that? Do we think that? I also think like the Men in Black scenario. So that's never really brought up in this stuff, but that's like ultimately what I think of when I hear of a black sedan like slowly lurking and watching. It's like, I don't know. I'm not sure. So I would love though to hear if you've ever heard of the Black Volga before this episode. Do your own hometowns, like does your own hometown have its own version of like this story or a story like this? I'd love to know that. We always need write-ins, you know that. Maybe it was just like an abandoned road or mysterious van, haunted bridge, like all that kind of stuff, you know, like we want to hear about it. Also, really quick, before I wrap up, I really want to thank you guys for bearing with me on just the solo episode. I know it's quite different. It's probably not as fun because I don't have to banter and bitch with Zachary. We love that. But again, we didn't want to give you multiple weeks without an episode. So I hope that you guys like this. I hope that the editing's okay. It's not going to be as great as what Zachary does for us. Please, please, please send us your stories. Leave a comment wherever you're listening or on our Facebook, our Instagram, YouTube. If you did enjoy this episode, please, or any of our episodes, please follow us on all of our social medias. Share us with your family and friends. Leave us a review because it really does help. It keeps us going. But again, if you loved this, let me know. And maybe we'll do more solo episodes instead of just skipping weeks or replaying older episodes. If this is something that you guys like, I love you. I thank you. It is so very late when I'm recording this. I appreciate you guys so much. The most important thing that you could do for us is to creep a reel, my little oddballs. Bye. And leave us an emoji, a black car. There has to be that.